Good morning, you all. I know we are at the cusp of 12 o'clock, so it's almost afternoon. But I hope that this video message finds you all well as I go over the last parts of the policy analysis paper. Please keep in mind that you still have parts 3 and 4 that are due on November the 25th. It is what I consider the reflective part of the paper. You are applying our NASW Code of Ethics, National Association of Social Workers Code of Ethics, as well as doing your reflection. So we started this policy analysis paper by laying the foundation and saying, and for you all, identifying a target population as well as identifying a social problem as it is related to the target population, and telling us the readers, right, me as the reader, but also your peers, as you have, many of you have already participated in persuasion speeches, as well as meeting with community members, faculty members, as well as your peers in social work, students, and disseminating this information at the artistic expression of the whys, like why does this matter? And so in thinking about that, you lay that foundation of why are we bringing this social issue to light as it impacts the target population, identifying a policy that seeks to address the social issue again as it relates to the target population, analyzing that policy, what works, what doesn't work, and then applying the 5 E's of policy analysis. And then also as a part of that 5E, as you have done your research, identifying areas for positive change, providing those recommendations. And as we think about policy, a lot of times this is the flow of it, right? There is the policy creation, the implementation of the policy, and then the analysis, what works, what didn't work, what are some of those unintended consequences, and how do we address them? And so as you see excuse me, amendments, reauthorizations, changes that need to be made, it comes from seeing the policy at work, right? We can put a lot of nice things on paper, but then when it flows out, what are the gaps? What are the areas that we miss? What are the areas that things occurred and it was unintended, right? And so that's where we go back to the proverbial drawing board and say that, hey, these changes need to be made. And so this is why I share with you all that policy is dynamic and that it is ever changing. And just a little caveat, that is why I was saying I struggled with Kamala Harris, her talk, because I want to hear what you have learned and what you'll do different. Essentially, that is what you all are saying for your policy analysis for part 2, especially identifying who the drafters are, and who sponsored it and the whys, right? Talking about who supports the bill when it's in its infancy form before it's become an act or a law, and then who opposed it, and then as you apply the 5 E's, in what ways is it effective as it addresses that social issue? In what ways is it being efficient in terms of whether it be human, financial, programmatic, right? Efficiency. And then we look at alternatives. What are some other things that may be seeking to address the same issue? But what are those alternatives as it compares to your policy and programs and services that are offered through that policy? And then thinking about its ethical soundness, right? How does it impact vulnerable and marginalized populations? I know I got my E's mixed up. And then just lastly, what are those recommendations for positive change? So you all did a great job. One of the biggest things, and I continue to stress it to you all, is that if it's not your own information, be sure to cite that source. That was probably the most prominent comment that I made across papers. And I think that you just ask yourself, where did I get this from? Is this my own original thought? And just by the way that you wrote many of the things, you meaning each individual student, I can tell that you all are doing the research. So cite your sources. This is also, it is not a research paper, but it requires research to identify the information. So there is an expectation that you are using sources. So if you have not used a source, please know that this will be reflective in your APA grade. Um, if you look at the rubric that I've been providing you all, at the very end, there's 15 points that is connected to APA writing. And so that's anything from the formatting, in-text citations, the reference page, and just making sure, as I say, that if we go back to the very first assignment that is connected to this policy analysis, it's the annotated bibliography, as well as that outline. That annotated bibliography is an opportunity for you to identify what information is there currently out about the social issue as it relates to the target population or the social issue at large, right? And so in identifying 3 initial articles that could lead you to more articles, I want you to incorporate those sources. Now, I also shared that if you find additional sources and now it makes those initial 3 sources irrelevant, that is fine. But you all are in a professional program, you all are college students. And so even if you're still grappling with APA writing and formatting, there is an expectation that you are citing your sources. Um, as we talk about being in a social work class that focuses on policy analysis, I have shared with you all that we talk about credibility. And as I was speaking with a colleague yesterday, one of the things that we talked about is at its foundation, if somebody comes up to you and says that Dr. Dozier said that we won't have class for the rest of the semester, you're likely going to ask, well, who told you that? Where did you find that information? Is it in the announcement? And so you're going to not only ask that peer to provide information as to where they got that information from, but then also you may be likely to, because you all know that my math correspondence to you all is through the announcements, right? You are likely going to go into your Canvas and look at the announcements and see, did I miss something, right? And so the reason why I'm bringing up this example is that you don't just take that information of Dr. Dozier canceling class for the rest of the semester at face value. You're going to ask the person who brought it up to you, where did they get that information from? Who did you hear it from? You're going to seek out the credibility of that source. If it's somebody that tends to joke all the time, you're going to say, oh, they're probably just playing with me, right? If it's somebody that you have found that is not always truthful, you're likely not going to believe them, and you're going to seek, right, a source for this information that has been provided to you. It's the same thing in academic writing, right? When you are saying information such as 45% of social work students do not pass a policy class, you may say, well, where did that come from, right? So who is the source? Or 10% of social workers, only 10% of social workers pass their licensure exam and go on to find a job, right? Well, where did that information come from? So I'm highlighting this because I've stressed it over the semester, the importance of citing your sources, but even in part 2, it continues to be a huge comment that I am providing to you all. And this is very much a growing way. And I know that you all are growing in your writing, but at the bare minimum, look at your papers. Have I cited a source? And what you run into, the reality is if you have not cited a source and you're using their information, you are plagiarizing. Now, I use these opportunities as teaching moments. And I don't push the envelope on plagiarism in terms of having a conversation, of course, one-on-one with you, as well as then if it continues, moving it on up the line. But I really want to bring that into you all's attention and hone in on that, because I know that we have talked about citing sources. If the information is not your own, and again, I see you all doing the research, but for me as your professor, if you're sharing it with your peers, as we are doing these persuasion speeches, you all are providing great information. It has been amazing to hear you all and see you develop from day one of class to now at persuasion speech phase. And so I see the research that is being done, but give credit to that author, to those authors, citing your sources. And so I'm gonna stop right there in terms of citations. But I really that was one of the big things that I saw as I made many of the comments. Um, is that there were some submissions that had no citations. And for me, it's like, well, where did you get this information from? And going back to my example, Dr. Dozier said that class is canceled for the rest of the semester. Although that sounds exciting, right? Who told you that? And so for you, think about in your real world when people bring information to you, who told you that? Who said that? How do you know that, right? These are the same questions that I am essentially asking you when I'm reading your paper. Where did you get this information from? That lends to the credibility of the information that you are providing, because we know in this day and age, in the advent of social media, people can say all kinds of things, right? But you go and see, is this real? The big thing, and I'll leave it right here, but the big thing is sometimes a famous celebrity has died and everybody will get all up in arms because they have not done their research. I have seen where they have essentially killed people on social media, and I'll just and it's not deep. I'll just do a quick little Google. Okay, they're living, right? So now I know that that information that I'm receiving is not credible. But if I take it at face value and don't critique that information, then I'm believing that somebody has died that is actually still living. So I hope those two examples help you to understand why it's important to cite sources. And I could sit right there all day in terms of credibility, but that is not what this video is about, y'all. So let me share my screen first and foremost. So first off, congratulations, y'all. We are down to the end, right? The end of the semester, the end of this policy analysis paper. Well, I will say y'all have done a phenomenal job. And so as we look at parts 3 and 4, we are looking at implications for social work practice. When you get to the research class with me, when we talk about implications, we look at 3 avenues, implications for research practice as well as policy. But for this assignment, we are just looking at implications for social work practice. And going back to the example that I provided you all at the top of the class, we are looking at as it relates to the Social Security Act. And so part 3A, you are looking at an NASW core value. I have provided the link to our NASW Code of Ethics in our Canvas modules. That's number 1. And then also many of you on that first day of class, when you begin to talk about what do you know about policy, you highlighted our NASW Code of Ethics as what guides us in terms of how we show up as ethical social workers. And so as it relates to your policy, thinking about not just the policy, but also the target population and social issue, what core value would you identify that you and you only have to identify one, right? You may say, Dr. Dozier, all of them, right? But just choose one core value that you feel that is most related to your population. And again, thinking about, I'm sorry, not population, your policy, and thinking about how it relates to that target population as well as social issue. And then we know that our core values are connected to an ethical principle. So talk about the connection of the ethical principle as well. And again, as we talk about citing, you're pulling this from the NASW Code of Ethics. That is your source. So you need to cite your source in parts A and B because you are pulling that information from our NASW website. Then part C is your personal reflection. You're going to evaluate your own personal understanding of your policy as it relates to the target population and social issue. And then for part C, we're talking about number 2, what is the personal impact for you as a social worker, right? I know you all aren't social workers right now, but as social workers in training, what is that personal impact that completing this policy analysis has had on you? And then lastly, I want you to kind of fast forward, right, to being in social work practice. What is the impact for social work practice when you think about the policy as it connects again to your target population and social issues? So bringing it all together and saying, why does this matter in social work? But also talking about what's now your understanding, what have you learned, and what is that personal impact? And then lastly, you're going to conclude, right? You're going to end it. Don't just drop me off at part C. You'll have just a nice one paragraph being 5 to 7 sentences, y'all. I have also been stressing that throughout the semester. Minimum of 5 sentences constitutes a paragraph in this class. I know that I've had classes in the past that said that 3 sentences is fine. I don't know what can you adequately talk about in 3 sentences when it relates to academic papers. But a final summary of what was learned overall, and then provide just a concluding statement. Okay, so again, this is the wrap up. It is very easy and digestible. The main things that you will be looking for and highlighting as I stop sharing my screen is going to, let me share my screen one more time. Our NASW Code of Ethics. Again, we have this link in our Canvas page. And you just scroll down to our ethical principles. We have 6 values: service, social justice, dignity and worth of the person, importance of human relationships, integrity, as well as competence. Okay, those are our 6 values, and with each value there is a connected ethical principle, as well as a brief, very brief overview of the specific value and ethical principle. All you have to do is identify one that connects to your policy, your target population, and social issue. All of those wrapped in together: policy, target population, and social issue, all wrapped in together. Choose one ethical principle, choose one value and ethical principle. Okay, so if you're going to talk about, if you want to highlight that the value that you want to focus on is service, you don't have to talk about social justice, dignity and worth of the person, integrity, competence. Only identify one. If you are pulling information from this website, right, verbatim, quoted, use quotations, and make sure that you cite it. But I want you all to take information and synthesize it into your own words as well. So for senior adults experiencing poverty, one of the things that we may talk about as it relates to our ethical principles and values is social justice, right? So social workers challenge social injustice. Poverty is a social injustice when we think about these systems that seemingly work together to keep a group of people in poverty, right? Um, we have talked about this semester the working poor, who experience poverty, women and children in poverty. The feminization of poverty is women and children being in poverty. We have talked about the experiences of persons of color and the differences, right, in access to employment in this class. And so when we look at social justice, that's the value that you would highlight, as well as ethical principle is social workers challenge social injustice. You look at what that means. Social workers pursue social change, particularly with and on behalf of vulnerable and oppressed individuals. So applying that to senior adults, we can look at senior adults. I just identified women, right? I have identified persons of color, aging within our society. Seniors are a vulnerable and oppressed group. And so we can talk about intersections of identity. What if there is a a partner that is now widowed and they have only worked inside the home, and so now not working outside of the home places them in poverty, as the person that was the breadwinner has now passed away, right? So what does that mean for seniors? Social workers, um social workers, social change efforts are focused primarily on issues of poverty, right? Unemployment, discrimination, as well as other forms of social injustice. These activities seek to promote sensitivity and knowledge about oppression and cultural and ethnic diversity. Social workers strive to ensure access to needed information, services, as well as resources, equality of opportunity, and meaningful participation in decision making for all people. So when we think about seniors that are in poverty, you can talk about what are some of the reasons. It could be discrimination. It could be unemployment. We've talked about in this class access to employment that takes a person out of poverty. Again, we have people that are considered the working poor. They are working 40 hours out of a week, right? And so 40 hours in a week, and so they are still in poverty. What are some of those reasons why? And if they never pull themselves out of poverty, think about what that experience looks like when they become a senior citizen. There are so many intersections of identities when we are talking about poverty, when we are talking about employment versus unemployment, discrimination, not just in the workplace, but prior to you being hired on to a position. And it's not just relegated to racial and ethnic identity. It is related to gender differences in pay, assumptions about whether or not a woman is going to put forth the decision to have a family. While also trying to have a career. So those quiet decisions that are being made about her ability. Individuals that identify as part of the LGBTQIA plus community, discrimination that and oppression that are experienced in the workplace for this specific community. And so do you see how we have to challenge social injustices for many of our vulnerable and oppressed groups? And so in looking at that, you'll talk about what social justice means. You'll talk about this ethical principle of social workers challenging social injustice and pull in some of these critical key concepts from our NASW Code of Ethics and how it applies again to the policy that you've chosen, that target population and social issue. This is where we are bringing it all to a head and saying, why does it matter in social work? What is your understanding now of the policy as it relates to your target population and social issue? What have you learned? And then what changes, right? When you think about, let me stop sharing this screen. When you think about the impact for social work practice, why does this matter? Why did you choose your topics, right? The code of ethics highlighted creating sensitivity, knowledge and awareness, right? So at the bare minimum, you are shining a light on a social issue that may not always be readily discussed. And many of you have highlighted areas that are growing in social work, but we don't always see talked about in our social work classes. They aren't the areas that I readily thought about when we talk about who are we going to help, who are those vulnerable and marginalized populations. So for you, from your perspective, you've done the research, right? Why does this matter to social work? And if you take nothing else from this class, I want you to continue to say, these are my whys. This is why this matters. This undergirds everything that we do in social work, telling the whys, right? Amplifying the voices of vulnerable and marginalized populations. And we use those words, but who are the people that we are talking about? And the groups that I advocate for may not always be the groups that you advocate for. And so that is why it takes all of us to do it. Because even though many of you have chosen some of the same policies, you have come at it from a different perspective. And so, again, I just want to share that I have really enjoyed. I know I'm saying this like this is the last class, but I have really enjoyed having each of you in my class this semester and learning from you. You have opened my eyes up to different populations because I can't know it all, right? And so I love this class because you all choose your own target population and social issue, and the way that it flows out from the policy analysis, the persuasion speech, as well as the museum. It really does my Professor Hart good. And I want you all, I know I got on to y'all about them citations because that's serious. I want you all to be credible when you are speaking. Know what you know, but also know where it comes from and ground it in the literature. Because again, lastly, we are looking at a world where information is disseminated so quickly that people aren't stopping to critique, where did this come from? Where is the source? So again, I have enjoyed it. You all are going to knock out this last part. It is all you connected to the NASW Code of Ethics. I want to see the citations, but it's also just a reflection of what you have learned and why this matters for social work practice, and then just doing that conclusion statement. So I hope this helps as you prepare to work on the final part of our policy analysis paper. If you have additional questions or concerns, please, as always, never hesitate to reach out to me. And we're gonna finish up strong. We have persuasion speeches tomorrow, and so I look forward to continuing to hear you all. And also, everybody should have up to this point. I have finished my grading, so if you have not received the grade, please reach out to me, because likely I put a comment and we need to hash it out. So have a great Monday, and I'll see y'all tomorrow. And just last thing. Um, if, and y'all might not even see this before tomorrow, but those of you who are scheduled to present on Tuesday, be prepared to present. But if you are to present on Thursday, be ready just in case somebody is not available on Tuesday, and feel free to volunteer. So thank you all, and I will see you all on tomorrow. Bye. Yeah.